So we see a lot of people saying that I'm straw manning when I talk about people on the left that excuse violence and all the violence we saw from Black Lives Matter, Antifa, and things like that occurred this summer. People say, no, people aren't really saying that. So I stumbled across, someone sent me a link. I stumbled across a video of someone that I've debated. Her name's Demon Mama. We had a debate on Antifa, which she thinks she's won because she screamed the F word more than me and interrupted me constantly. Apparently that's a victory in her book. But she claims I know nothing about Antifa, and Antifa is this positive organization. That's her claim. She even claims that Aaron J. Danielson, the person that was murdered by an Antifa member in Portland, she said that was self-defense. That wasn't a case of murder, and she saw the same video evidence we saw. So that gives you an idea of where this person's coming from. Anyways, I was recently called into Dylan Burns' show and had a discussion about, I was just listening to a show, and he had a caller call in and talked about right-wing people are hypocrites. They're hypocrites when they talk about political violence. And this was after the January 6th riots. And so I think that's hilarious because there can be right-wing people that are hypocrites. That's absolutely true. But we've seen the overall majority of people in positions of power in the establishment and virtue signaling to the left. We've seen them be hypocrites when it comes to left-wing violence all spring and summer. We've seen it. And so I called into Dylan's show to talk about it. So Demon Mama decided she was going to review my discussion with Dylan. And so I want to show you 3 clips because I think it really personifies exactly what I'm talking about when I see what so many of the people on the left argue against me. So I want you to listen to these 3 clips. Now, they're not in order, but they're in chronologically, but they're in an order that makes sense. And I will encourage everyone to go to her channel and they could watch the entire video. I'm not going to do her whole video. That's not fair to her. I'm not going to rip her whole content. But we're going to watch these 3 small clips and see what you all think about it. That's not the clip, is it? All right. Clip number 1. Nonsense. And so I don't understand. If either you're against political violence or you're not. I've been vehement. I could back up my claim. I called out Trump supporters that did this. I said they should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. If they could find who directly led to the killing of this cop, if this is how he died, they should be given the death penalty.
Listen to that. Listen to how much. I wish maybe Dylan will call him on him. But listen to how much he embeds into his argument there. Oh, if they can prove that he even died because of this. Look at how much he's all of his arguments are instilling doubt. This is why I call Rob Noor a demagogue, because Rob Noor does not make rational arguments. What he does is he drops seeds of doubt. He drops conspiratorial thought into everything that he says. What Rob does is propaganda. He doesn't make arguments. In fact, he usually avoids making arguments in lieu of sending seeds of doubt into the crowd.
Okay, so the argument is because I correctly said then that we still didn't have proof. Now, I condemned faster than her probably. I condemned the people that were fighting with police at the Capitol. I condemned it before they even got into the Capitol. I said that even the people that broke in that weren't fighting with the police probably deserved to face some sort of punishment, similar to the punishment those that broke in under Kavanaugh. Anyone that fought with the police, I don't give any quarrel about them. If you fought with the police, you should face the repercussions of that. If a police officer died as the result of injuries he sustained while you were attacking them, then you should face the harshest penalty possible. That's what I truly believe. But I correctly, because I knew at the time that we still didn't have evidence of how this officer Sitnik had passed away, that I just wasn't sure. And so I was making that point. So it's funny because you can see that her assertion is that it's clear that the Trump supporters killed him. It's clear that that's the case. And so that somehow makes me disingenuous. But that's not clear. And then now the truth's starting to come out. We're not certain. It could still become that that's the case. If that's the case, again, I'm not wavering at all. The people that would have killed that officer deserve the harshest penalty. However, this is from a CNN article just the other day. According to one law enforcement official, medical examiners did not find signs that the officer sustained any blunt force trauma. So investigators believe that early reports that he was fatally struck by a fire extinguisher are not true. One possibility being considered by investigators is that Sitnik became ill after interacting with a chemical irritant like pepper spray or bear spray that was deployed in the crowd. But investigators reviewing the video of the officer's time around the Capitol haven't been able to confirm that in tape and the recovered so far, the official said. So in other words, I was right to not just take the story and run with it, but she says that that somehow makes me a hack. Now, the important thing to see here is you could judge for yourself what I've done on my show, and I've condemned all political violence. I've had guest after guest after guest on the right that have called in and said, no, storming the Capitol was right, and so now's the time for violence. I've called that out every single time. People that are frequent watchers of my show know, even some of the people that are my friends that have called in and suggested that, including some of my co-hosts on my radio show. I fought back against that. So how am I a hypocrite in this situation? Just because I said, well, we'll see how this officer died. If he was killed by the Trump supporters, the protesters, the rioters, then yes, they should face the full consequences. She says that that's me hedging. That's not hedging at all. At all. No, Prag, there was not a video of him getting hit with the fire extinguisher. There was a video of a police officer getting hit with the fire extinguisher, but it was not this person. The left wing ran, they saw that photo and said, oh, they assumed that this was the officer that died. He didn't. And the reason that this is incredibly shady, because this is the big thing that they'll talk about. That one, it was at the Capitol, and second, that people were murdered, including a cop was murdered. But again, if this cop ended up dying from things that we literally see happen at almost every Black Lives Matter rally, regular clashes involving tear gas, then how are we going to say that this riot was uniquely worse? It's only through a pre-existing medical condition or a freak accident that chemical inhalants that were deployed by the police or by people in the crowd ended up causing him to hours later have a stroke. They can't even find visible evidence that he was abused at the actual rally. See, so you can see how this is being used as a propaganda piece. Now look, the riot, it was bad. People attacking police are bad. Period. I call that out. Period. But again, as I talked about yesterday, the problem is we have to look at this in the sense of proportionality. One, how bad was this versus the riots and the violence we've seen on the other side? And I contend seeing, even if you would say this is the worst one, which I don't think it is when it comes to actual terms of violence, but even if you make that argument, the fact that we saw hundreds on the other side shows that proportionately the violence has been much worse on the left, at least when it comes to this summer and riots and things like that. However, the other thing we look at is the reaction. Remember, after left-wingers rioted outside the White House, trying to get into the White House and remove Donald Trump and presumably harm him, people in positions of power in the media, in entertainment industry, in academia, and even in the Democratic Party mocked Trump and called him bunker boy. The New York Times demanded that an op-ed of Tom Cotton be pulled for suggesting that maybe National Guard should be deployed to stop riots like this. And yet their reaction when we saw what happened at the Capitol was 25,000 National Guard troops, a border fence around the Capitol with razor wire, starting a 9/11 style commission to go after Trump supporters, libertarians in the name of John Brennan, labeling everyone white supremacist with no proof whatsoever. So the proportion of the amount of violence we saw and the hyperbolic reaction to it has been worse, in my opinion, on the left in both cases. But when I bring this up, I'm constantly told, oh, no, the left didn't excuse it. No, or something like that. I'm strawmanning. So let's get to the next section that I wanted to discuss from Demon Mama's video. Is that fair?
BLM associated protests? Oh, sure. We can say like a dozen. Sure.
Okay. A dozen, even. So there were far more than a dozen riots for BLM. But in my discussion with Dylan, I'm just trying to get a concession that we at least saw some amount of riots, right? And he says, okay, we'll go with a dozen. So for the sake of argument, we're talking about a dozen BLM riots that occurred. A dozen. Let's say that. That's 12. Like, okay. If people make excuses for those 12.
Even if that claim is true, even if that claim was true, none of them were sieges on the Capitol. None of them involved mass death, and these were a part of the biggest civil rights movement in American history. They were cop riots. Yeah. That's all he ever does. He always finds a way to excuse his shit and try and make it look like everyone's a hypocrite except for himself, when he knows that there's no claim. And we had this debate, by the way. I had this debate with him. You can go watch my debate with him about Antifa. He knows jack shit about Antifa. He doesn't know anything about the groups that he extols as terrorists.
So here you see she claims that the Black Lives Matter and Antifa riots wasn't Black Lives Matter and Antifa, it was cops rioting. So all the 223 instances of violence that you saw that the actual Stanford report talked about that's cited by the left. Oh, only 7% of Black Lives Matter rallies had violence. It was 223 separate locations. Some of those locations like Portland had riots almost nightly for around 80 to 90 days. And what's her excuse? Now remember, in the first clip I showed you, she claims, even though I say we should condemn political violence on all sides, the truth is that I'm really a hypocrite. And then what's the first thing she does when we're talking about violence that occurred in the left? It wasn't the left rioting, it was cops rioting. Now, wait a minute. How are you going to, on one hand, talk about the noble police at the Capitol and how they're victims? The police were where's the police shot and killed someone, right? At the Capitol riot. Where's Demon Mama and the rest of the people that blame the police for everything? Where are them saying that things got out of hand at the Capitol? That was the police's fault. They started it. But every single Black Lives Matter rally was a cop riot. It was a cop riot when it got out of hand. Do you see the double standard here? So again, we see taking no blame whatsoever. The left didn't do anything wrong. This is unsurprising because she's defended Antifa, saying that they're a peaceful organization, and that even when one of theirs murdered a Trump supporter in Portland that we all saw on video, she claims it's self-defense. So it's unsurprising. This is what I'm talking about. When you have demagogues like her that are willing to say any violence on my side is justified or it doesn't exist, what did you expect was going to happen? Eventually, extremists on the other side would play that game. GSU says, I wish we separated BLM and Antifa. Well, they are separate organizations, but they both committed violence. Members of them both, or at least rallies that they had both expounded into violence many times that we saw over the spring and the summer, right? That happened. I would argue Antifa's worse, for sure. But the truth is that, like in Minneapolis, when they burnt down a police precinct, that was largely Black Lives Matter. There were other instances we saw, it was largely Black Lives Matter. Places like Portland and Seattle, that was a mixture of Antifa and Black Lives Matter. In Portland, usually it's mostly Antifa, right? Now, GSU asked earlier about the idea of politicians not living in fear. Totally agree. But we see that politicians do live in fear from people that have spouted rhetoric from the left as well, like Republicans at a ball field that were shot up by someone parroting Bernie Sanders rhetoric, like Rand Paul, who had his ribs broken by his neighbor, like Rand Paul again, who was swarmed and attacked leaving a Trump rally, like people in the Kavanaugh hearings that had people chasing them into elevators, Republicans being chased into elevators by people screaming at them. Yes, there are terrible people on both sides that threaten people. Again, let's not forget on May 31st, a bunch of left-wingers rioted in D.C. and fought with the police and the Secret Service trying to get in to remove Donald Trump. What was the reaction to that? Most people on the left don't even know this incident happened. I was calling that despicable at the time. I also called what happened at the Capitol despicable, but it's being blown out of proportion. There were so many of them, if they really wanted to go in and harm people, they would have. They didn't have firearms and things like that. The biggest weapon you hear people talk about were zip ties. But the article I read showed the guy didn't even bring the zip ties. He literally found them laying on a table when he got into the Capitol and claims he picked them up because he didn't want them used against Trump supporters. I don't know if it's true or not, but it's clear that the situation's being blown out of proportion. Was it bad? Yes. Anyone who fought with the police there certainly should be arrested. I'm not going to deny it. But when we compare it to what we saw over and over and over again from left-wing agitators and rioters, and when we compare the reaction from the people in power that basically not only bailed out rioters, not only parroted and said that we needed unrest, we needed to get into the face of Republicans, this is after Trump supporters and Republicans were being harmed. They were being chased out of restaurants. Kellyanne Conway, Ted Cruz. Don't you agree, GSU? Right-wing politicians shouldn't have to live in fear? Yet that's specifically what was being called for by people like Maxine Waters. They say that's fine, but when Trump said we should peacefully go demonstrate, that's somehow incitement to violence. So remember, she says I'm a hypocrite that makes excuses for my side's violence, and then the very next statement she makes is, oh, the left doesn't commit any violence. Those were all cop riots. Now, one of the things I talk about finally when you talk about incitement to violence is if you're going to say, well, the incitement was saying because Trump was exaggerating or lying about the election being stolen, I believe that he feels that it probably was stolen. Regardless if he was right or not, that's what I believe he feels. But even if not, if the argument's going to be that hyperbolic language leads to violence, particularly in things that are untrue, then what do we say about like AOC refusing to condemn when an Antifa member from the John Brown Gun Club actually attacked an ICE facility with long rifles and Molotov cocktails? Luckily, he was the only one that was killed as the ICE officials took him out. But he did so in a day when Antifa removed a United States flag from an ICE detention center and started to trample the flags and stuff. Then someone attacked that actual detention center. Using the rhetoric that AOC used that ICE detention centers are concentration camps and ICE agents are Nazis. AOC refused. She didn't take credit for that. She didn't say my rhetoric led to this. She refused to condemn that. Let's see what Demon Mama, here's a sober-minded person, right? She claims that I'm terrible, that I'm hedging, that I'm willing to condemn violence on both sides. So when I talk about violence being done in the name of people attacking ICE officers and federal officers, saying they're concentration camps and they're Nazis, let's see what she has to say about that. Mainstream politicians, academics, media people claiming that Trump was Hitler, all of his supporters were racist, that ICE agents were concentration camps, and they were like Nazi soldiers. So you don't think that
That's because they verifiably are. ICE agents are manning concentration camps, you idiot.
And there you have it. Oh, I see we have some in the chat. Am I defending ICE? Yes, I'm defending ICE, particularly ICE agents. Are ICE agents Nazis? Are they running concentration camps? GSU Gambit, I'll talk about that in a second. Remind me to bring that up, the idea of Antifa versus Black Lives Matter. That's the point. That's the point I'm trying to make. So yesterday, when I had a caller say, you're strawmanning the left, none of them make excuses for the violence. Here we have someone with an entire audience of people agreeing that says BLM and Antifa never engaged in any violence. I don't know shit about it. And actually, it was the cops that were rioting, not BLM and Antifa. But when cops clashed with people at the Capitol, their stance is completely different. Oh, that was completely different. That was different. That was an instance of the cops being the good people. And that incident is really bad. And then when you bring up, what about people parroting the rhetoric of politicians saying ICE agents were Nazis and they had concentration camps and their facilities got attacked? They are running concentration camps. That's what she says. So this is, I'm not doing, this segment that I'm doing now, and it's going to be a short video of its own, I didn't do it for people on the left necessarily, though if anyone enjoyed it and they get something out of it, so be it. But the rest of you that don't fall into this radical ideology, I want you to see what they truly believe when they think no one's watching. That's what many of them believe. Yes, ICE agents are Nazis. Yes, Black Lives Matter and Antifa should riot. They're the good guys. And when they riot, it's always the cops' fault. But, my God, when the other side riots, it's the end of the world. That's what these people believe, and that's what the establishment is leading them to believe. That's what the establishment wants as well. They see Antifa and the people in Black Lives Matter that are violent, they see them as useful tools. That's what they see them as. And I'm glad that people like Demon Mama can prove the point of how radical they are and be duped by these establishment people into supporting the causes that they want and cheering for violence on the left, but then, oh my God, getting the vapors when it comes to violence on the right.